If only the rain would make my hair grow. Well, it's been raining pretty much all morning here today in Niagara Falls, and it cancels my opportunity for a nice ride today. But it does give us the opportunity to take care of a project on the DR that I've been wanting to do for a few weeks. So today we're going to change the clutch out on the DR650, and while we're in there, we're going to look at the neutral safety switch as well to make sure that's not posing any threats to the internals of this engine. So grab yourself a coffee, sit back, enjoy the show today on Dino's Tinker Shed. Now, just about every motorcycle on the road today uses some form of a clutch. Now, there are some exceptions, as automatic transmissions and some clutch-free manuals do exist out there, but for most riders, the tried and true manual transmission is probably what they have in their ride today. Now, the clutch's role, whether it's in a car, truck, or motorcycle, is to isolate engine power from the transmission and the drive line so that you can stop your motorcycle in gear and slowly feed that power back into the system so you can take off smoothly from a stop and shift gears while on the move. Now, just about everyone has had some story about their first experiences learning how to use a clutch in a motorcycle. Stalling, shifting gears out of time, or trying to stop without pulling in the clutch levers are pretty typical problems. I myself have a pretty good story about hitting a fence post. And unlike a car or truck, which uses a single clutch disc and is dry, most motorcycle clutches are actually a multi-disc setup, and they sit within some form of oil, making them a wet clutch. Now, the clutch on the DR is located right here underneath this engine cover. And when you actuate the clutch, you'll actually see this lever move when you pull in the hand lever. However, some other manufacturers don't use an integrated clutch like this bike. They use what's known as a divorced clutch. So this means that your transmission, your engine, and your drivetrain are all independent items. So think Harley Davidson. And it's also important to note that the DR does use a cable actuated clutch. Some bikes use hydraulic systems to do this. However, whichever setup that you have, the reality is the clutch is really a wear item like your brakes. And eventually you will need to adjust and ultimately replace the consumable components of your clutch. The question is, why do I think the clutch actually needs to be changed on this bike? And there's a few reasons that I think this. The first one is just the mileage on the bike. It's got over 40,000 kilometers. I don't really have a history of what's been or what hasn't been done to the bike. There's some evidence that someone's been into that clutch case because I can see a little bit of RTV silicone squeezing out here and there. But I don't know for sure if the clutch has ever been changed. Now, mistakenly, I put the wrong kind of oil in this bike when I first got it. I put just straight 10W40 car oil in it, which I used to use all the time in a lot of bikes when I rode a lot. But realistically, motorcycle oils have come a long way. There's motorcycle specific oils. I want to run those types of oils in this bike. So I thought, let's swap the clutch out, drain the bike, and start running a proper oil in it. Maybe the most telling thing for me, though, was the actual adjustment on the knurl lever itself. So on the clutch lever, where the ferrule is, there was absolutely zero amount of adjustability left on that lever to take up any additional clutch wear. So if I was to take this bike on a long ride and I needed to adjust the clutch after a week or so, there's nothing left. So I thought, let's just do the clutch now, and then I know where I sit with the bike. It's not a terribly difficult job to do, and it's not overly expensive. I think overall the clutch kit was in around $220 Canadian shipped to my door. So let's get into this. There really are three primary consumables within the clutch, things that you're going to change on a routine basis. And I'll show you what those are within this DP clutch kit here. So let me just pull these things out and we'll have a look at them. And I'll tell you what they all are. So the first item are clutch springs. So the clutch springs, although you can measure your existing clutch springs for free play, they should be at least 33 millimeters. These ones are 36. Over time, get compressed and they lose their ability to actually rebound. So often kits come with new springs. Now, whether they do or don't, even if your old clutch springs are in good shape, you may want to consider these because they are a little bit heavier springs. So the spring is really what applies the clamping force to the clutch pack. So when you pull in the lever, that's the resistance that you're feeling when you pull it in. Now these heavier clutch springs really do help with clamping force, which does the work. Just remember that you need to apply force to the clutch pack in order for the clutch to actually work. However, remember, the heavier the clutch spring, the more fatigue you're going to get on your left hand pushing that or pulling that lever in and out. However, if you do ride hard, you haul a lot of gear, or you're like me, you carry a few extra pounds, those clutch springs really are an option that you should think about. Now, the other two components here are known as your clutch steels, which are a solid steel plate, and your friction plates, which are typically an aluminum disc with some type of bonded friction material on top of them. And these are sandwiched in alternating orders like this to create what's known as a clutch pack. So if you remember when you were a kid, you remember seeing science shows where they used to take phone books, remember phone books, those things where you used to look phone numbers up, and you interlace the pages. It's almost impossible for two people to pull those phone books apart just because of the friction of the pages. And that's how these clutches actually work. They're really an interesting piece of technology. So the first thing that we need to do before we take this case cover off is actually drain the oil. And you've seen me do this a few times already on different things. And I am just gonna crack it like this. It takes a bit to get this out, and then we're just going to drain the entire crankcase oil here. Let's see it come. Here we go. And voila. Okay, so to get the oil filter out, it's located underneath this cover that says oil filter. So you don't necessarily need to take this off, I don't believe, to do the clutch, but we're going to do it anyway because we're changing the oil. So it's held in place with 3 8mm bolts that go around the circumference here, and I'm just using a nut driver to get these out. Just a little bit, not much. So on the back side of this cover, this spring sits right like that. And what that spring does is it just pushes against the oil filter and keeps it sealed. And you're also going to see this O-ring here. We're going to clean all that up before we put it back together. Now the filter itself just sort of wiggles out. They actually sell a special tool for this. It looks like a screwdriver with a threaded end on it. I don't see why you would ever spend the $12 or whatever it is for that. So as you can see, this is just a paper element. There is an O-ring that sits on the back, and you don't want to lose that. I am going to actually mark both on the case, up above, and on the arm itself. And we are going to remove this off of that shaft. There we go. So I imagine this is probably got a bolt that has to come all the way out. So we're gonna take it all the way out. I can't imagine it just being a pinch bolt. There it comes. And we'll probably have to pry this up a little bit to get this guy off. There we go. And up it comes. Come on, baby. A little more. There we go. There's 2 oil lines that have to be removed off the case before you can actually take it off. So the front one here has 2 8mm bolts, and we're just gonna take these off. Gonna get them on there. There we go. And underneath this fitting here, there will be another O-ring. So it's gonna come off. It's gonna be a little bit of oil, and then we're gonna take a look to see where the O-ring is. And the O-ring is in the case. The upper hydraulic line is attached with a 12mm bolt here and two compression washers, one on either side of this banjo fitting. Now, the next step to get this case half off, or this case cover off, is actually to take off the brake lever. It actually blocks your ability to get the case cover off. Now, on a standard DR, you're also going to have to remove, or at least take one of the foot peg bolts out to pivot the foot peg out of the way. Now mine has a lowering bracket on it, which actually lowers it and drops the foot peg backwards a little bit. So I don't think I'm going to have to do that myself. I'm going to start by taking off these brake springs, which hopefully shouldn't be too hard. Famous last words, right? Let's see. Needle nose pliers are always helpful. There we go. So back in here you can see the hairpins that are holding the brake pedals on and the clevis onto the brake pedal. And these can be a little challenging. Someone's really bent these around nicely here. So I've got just a pair of needle nose pliers, and I'm just going to try to straighten these out. You're going to kind of see the easiest way sometimes is just to grab them with a pair of side cutters or with a pair of needle nose and just pull them through the eyelet. I'm going to try to straighten this out first, then I'll spin it around and see if I can do that. And I've got a whole box of these, so I'm not going to keep these. There's the first one, and then the clevis should just pop. The clevis bolt should just pop right out. Now you can see that that's free, and that sometimes is enough to get it out. But I want to. Oh, we have one little washer there too, so I'll have to make sure we get that washer on the right side. Put that right in there. I want to get this brake lever right out so that I can grease the shaft on it as well. So we're going to do the same kind of trick. Squeeze those together if I can. There we go. And that is a little tricky to get that out. Let's see if this will work. Nope, that didn't work. Oh, I think it's finally moving. Here we go. What a pain, eh? Get back in there. There, okay. Now, this should just slide right out. There we go. And you can see it's time for some lube on it anyway. This is a very rudimentary drawing of where all of the bolts go, and it's on a piece of cardboard. So as I take the bolts out, I will put them into their respective spots so that they go back in. And the reason I do this is I really don't know if there are different lengths, if they're the same lengths, that kind of thing. So a template like this helps out quite a bit. So let's get started taking these out. So I'm going to go around and actually start. I'm just going to break them all free to start. When you get up to this one here at the top, this one has a sealing washer on it. It's the only one of the bolts that really does. You want to make sure you keep that washer on that bolt and positioned on our little template. And you can see right here, it is this one right here. And if you do forget, it's the one that's right next to the oil line. So that is our completed bedazzled thing there. more than likely it's going to need a little light tapping with a dead blow hammer. Let me just get a hold of that. You don't want to use any kind of a hard faced hammer, but we're going to try just sort of tapping around here, seeing if we can break the stiction on this and walk it out. Feels like it's moving. There it goes. There we go. So this is what you're looking at once you get the cover plate off. And one thing you may notice, tucked way back in here, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually a couple locating dowels on the case covers that you need to make sure you don't lose, one thing, and also to make sure that you get them in the right holes. So there's two of them on this particular case. One of them came off with the cover, and the other one's tucked back in here. You can maybe just barely see it. In order to get these bolts out, we need a 10mm socket. And I like to use a 6-point on critical sockets like this, and that's why I'm using a deep well. And I'm going to use it on a 3/8 drive. So just like when you tighten up any kind of a plate like this, we're going to slowly loosen these off one at a time. So we're going to go around a couple times here, and that's just to make sure that there's no stress. You don't want this to rack as it comes out and possibly damage the fixture. And they're not in here with a lot of force, so you're going to see it's very easy for me to undo these a little bit at a time. And you can kind of see we just walk our way around until we get it out all the way. And these are actually, and there's no pressure left on these. These are retaining our springs underneath there. They're hiding on us. There's one right there. And this just comes out lickety-boo. And I'm just going to put these into another container. I'm going to pull out all of these, and when we get them onto the bench, we're going to measure those. So now our pressure plate should just pull out. Here we go, and it's actually got one of the plates stuck to it. So I'm just going to walk this out, making sure that that little guy here doesn't fall into our oil pan. And the back side, you can see it almost looks like a little disc brake, doesn't it? This is your pressure plate. So this is the wear surface that this friction disc actually rides on. Kind of cool. Now, this entire clutch pack should just slide out. All of the steels and friction plates, for the most part, should come out as one piece. There we go. The only one that stays in place is the steel in the backside here, which is a different steel altogether. It's actually, I think they call that the number 2 steel. So you can kind of see, here's your clutch pack. Now if you were going to reuse this clutch pack, you would want to keep as much as possible the discs, the tabs on the friction discs lined up, and the order of friction steel in place. So normally people will scribe a mark across here and keep the kit knowing this is the outside face. We're not going to do that, but we are going to measure these discs and just sort of see how they look up on the bench. Well, now that we have the clutch basket and the hub and the friction plate and the clutch pack out, we can really see the inner workings here of the oiler and the small gears that work here. But we can also now see the neutral sending unit. Now this is the issue that a lot of people talk about with the DR, that these two Phillips head screws over time can vibrate out and they fall through this oil gallery that leads to the bottom of the engine. In a worst case scenario, these can actually destroy your engine from the inside out, and we definitely don't want that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull these out and I'm going to thread lock these with some blue thread lock. I know some people use red, the problem I have with red thread lock is it's permanent. In order to get red thread lock out again, you actually have to heat it. And I don't want to get in here with a torch and start having to heat up all these castings if that neutral sending unit ever does fail. So instead, I'm just going to back them out and hit them with blue thread lock. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to plug that gallery just with a piece of paper towel. If I happen to drop one of these bolts as I thread them, threaded bolts out, they're going to fall right down in where I don't want them. So the best practice is to do that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit this with a little bit of brake cleaner to start with. So I'm just going to go like that, and I'm going to dry it off with a paper towel just to give the thread lock the best possible chance it can to actually sit or seat. And then I'm just going to use a little generous amount of blue thread lock here. This might be out of focus. There we go. I'm going to thread that right back in. I'm going to push in as I tighten it. There we go. I'm going to pull out this one. And these are not all that tight in there. I'll be honest with you. I'm glad that I dug this deep. There it is. Oh, see? And I'm going to hit that with a little bit of brake cleaner off screen and dry that out. There we go. And hit it with a little bit of blue thread lock. Actually, a fairly generous amount of blue thread lock. Now they do sell a safety wire kit for this as well. And a lot of people choose to do that. And if you do that process, you're going to have to take that windage tray off as well. But I've had really good luck with blue Loctite over the years with things like this. And I think I'm going to be okay. I'm not overly concerned about it. Now, you can actually reuse these if they're within the wear limits. So what you do is you take your verniers here, set them to 0, and you measure across these surfaces here. And the wear limit for this is 2.6 millimeters. And if I measure on here, this one is sitting at 2.89, which is under the normal limit of 2.9 millimeters, 2.87. So they are slightly worn. And I went through and checked a few of these other ones, and they're all about the same. They've got a little bit of wear, but they're still within the service limits. And then you want to have a look at the steels. And what you want to look at with the steels is any kind of bluing or wear that looks out of place. And you can kind of see this one's starting to show signs of some unusual wear patterns in here maybe. I still think they're good. And if you were to reuse these, you can take a piece of glass, or if you're fortunate enough to have a granite surface, you can place these on that surface and take a feeler gauge. I believe it's 4 thou is the warp gap on these, and feel around the outside to make sure that they're still parallel and true. Like I said, I'm not going to reuse these. I'm putting a fresh clutch and clutch pack right in there, so I'm not worried about it. We're going to have a quick look here. So this is our pressure plate. So this is what the springs push against to apply pressure to the discs. And what you'll see is that disc floats around on there, and then when it's under pressure, it grabs on the sandwich. So this is nice and clean. There doesn't appear to be any galling or cracking in the surface or any of the parts. And this bearing journal in here is really good. It floats really well. So overall, that part is in great shape. $34.28. So not only are these in spec, they're really consistent as well. And that's usually pretty common with any type of manufactured product from any of the major manufacturers. They make really good products. So I won't throw these away. I'll keep them. You never know when a spring like that comes in handy. And I'm going to start putting the clutch basket back together in the bike, and then we can start loading in our new clutch. Now, most wet clutches need pre-soaking before you actually install them in the bike. Now, this DP clutch does not, it actually says you don't have to soak these, but I'm still going to soak them. I'm going to dip them at least to get them coated in oil. So I'm going to take a little bit of the Motul that we're going to be using in the bike, and I am going to put it into this pan here. So what you do is, or at least what I'm going to do, is I'm going to soak these clutch discs and the steels as I put them into the bike so they're good and coated. So here's our first freshly soaked clutch disc, and you see it slides right in. And I'm going to dip our steel as well. And see how this works? The steel actually holds onto the inside, this drum here, and this is messy, oh man, our friction discs ride on the basket with these tangs. So we're basically creating lasagna, and I love lasagna. You want to make sure that you don't accidentally put two steels in, because they stick together, especially if they have a little bit of oil on them. They actually stick together, and you inadvertently could put two steel plates together, and in the end you end up short one. We are just about there. I have one friction disc left here. There we go. Okay, so we are going to reinstall the pressure plate, and I am just going to add some oil all the way along that surface to make sure that it is lubricated. And the reason we do this is because I cleaned it off to inspect it for any cracks or any damage. So we need to line these towers up with the holes like that. There we go. And then we can place in the new springs. And we are going to, the nice thing about a nut driver is you can sort of use it to push against the washer. And now see what I'm going to do here is I'm going to step across over to this one. And even with these slightly longer springs, you can still get enough threads. What I like to do is, as you're tightening these up, is make sure that the washers are centered on the spring itself. You can actually get them so that the washer sits off to one side. That's not really what you want. And I'm going to go in a little bit. I'm just kind of gauging the height of the washers inside the recess here in terms of how much pressure I'm applying. And I'm just going to go all the way around like that. Keep walking it in. I haven't bottomed these out yet. Here. Okay, I just hit the bottom. So technically that clutch is seated in there. Now all I need to do is torque these. So the clutch bolt or the spring retainers are held in at 10 Newton meters of force. I'm going to sneak up on these. As I said, I'm going to torque these in a cross pattern. But that is, seriously, all the torque that is required on these. So I'm just going to go around. It's not much. That's it. And remember, the springs are pushing on these all the time. So it's really hard to undo them through vibrations. Okay, so in the end, this scraper really didn't take that gasket material off very well at all. Whoever put this on the last time really put it on really good. And in the end, I just needed to roto-lock all that off with those preparation discs. So now there's a fair amount of contaminants in here. I'm going to spray this down with some brake cleaner and clean all of these channels out with some compressed air. I'm going to do that outside so that you don't have to get stuff everywhere. And I'll bring it back and we'll have a look at it. So cleaned all the debris out, cleaned all the oil galleries, and now I'm just going to take a little bit of brake clean on a nice clean paper towel, and I'm going to run it all around all of these mating surfaces here. All right, just to make sure that they're completely oil free. Now, very similar to the last person, I am going to glue this onto this side only, so that when the clutch cover has to come off, it can go right back on without having to bind the gasket. So to do that, I'm going to use this Power Sport gasket maker. So I just kind of go like this. I take a little bit on the brush, and I paint my way around. So what I'm going to do is I will put the gasket on here. I will set it onto the bike and put a couple bolts in. But I am not going to tighten this down quite yet. And the reason I'm not going to do that is I want this RTV to sort of gel up, for lack of a better term. But I will put the bolts in just to make sure that everything's lined up. Then I'll come back in probably about an hour and I'll torque this down. I'll take a little break. Well deserved, I think. So this can be kind of tricky, but I'm going to give it a go. So remember, we've got a dowel pin up here and a dowel pin down here that we have to line up. So let's start with those. And I'm trying to do this without too much damage to the gasket. Because, you know, you don't want to damage the gasket either. Okay, so there we go. That's in. Trying to get it onto the crank seal in there. There we go. There. Okay, see how it sits right down? The shaft rotated in. Okay, that's a good fit. Make sure the O-ring's there, and it is. Okay, so like I said, I'm just gonna ever so slightly tighten these down just to make sure that they're sort of seated, and then I'll come back. And I think I'm going to put a new bolt in there because this one is looking a little bit shabby. So let's see what I have. This looks like the right size. I always keep a ton of hardware around. Okay, so we've got our 8mm bolts here, and I did check, the O-ring is still in there. Nice, nice. Put that guy there. And I'm going to spin these down here like this. And again, it's an O-ring. It doesn't need to be super tight. It'll seal really good. And then we have our banjo bolt. So remember, it has to have a crush washer underneath and a crush washer on top. And here we go. There we are. And I need my 12mm spanner. So I don't have a torque wrench that I can fit in there. So this is just tightening up. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do here before we torque the cover is I'm just going to reinstall a new oil filter. So I'm going to use this high flow filter. It's an HF137, and I've already put the O-ring back in around that little shaft there. So this is, again, it's a paper element. There's no need to lube it or anything like that. It just fits right back inside like that. I've cleaned all this surface with some brake cleaner. And what I'm going to do next is that spring there, I'm just going to capture that with the spring and then pull the filter square. So I capture it, I've got it. Now I'm just going to put it square and make sure that the Suzuki is pointed straight up. And I'm not even going to use a ratchet on this. I'm just going to give this a little bit of a snug down with my hands and this nut driver. And because it has an O-ring in there, it really doesn't need a lot more than what it already has. So this should be good. Let's change up now, and we'll torque up those 8mm cap head screws on the cover itself. And now what I need to do is go around and actually torque these. So the manual says that these should be around 10 to 11 Newton meters. It actually says the crankcase bolts, which are also 8mm. So I've got this 1/4 inch driver set to about 92 inch pounds. And I'm just going to go around and I'm going to snug these up in that cross pattern that we talked about. So that's torqued up. Now all we have to do is put the oil plug in the bottom, and I think we can put some oil in this, hook up the clutch cable, and we can probably even start it and see how it runs. Okay, let's do that right now. What's nice is, look at how much cable I have here now compared to what it was. So we're just going to do a reverse order here. We're going to fit it underneath the lever, and then we're going to slide it up and through the furrows here into place. So there we go. Now, this is what's interesting. Remember how I had no free play at all? Or no adjustability for free play? Let's see what I got now. So I'm going to back this out. So that is just touching. So now for free play, the reason you have to have free play in your clutch is as the steering turns on these bikes, it applies pressure to the cable and can actually cause your clutch to slip. So the factory says that you have to leave some free play in the lever so that when you turn the bars, it doesn't pull on the clutch. Now, there's bunches of different ways to adjust this. The way that I like to think about it is you feed enough furl in, so there's about 1 to 2 credit card widths in between the lever body and the lever itself. So right about there is where I think it should be. So I'm just going to lock the furl down there, slide the boot over, and that should be done. I've cleaned this up pretty well. It looks nice, but I want to clean the actual hole itself. So the way I'm going to do that, just a little brake cleaner in there, and then I'm just going to fit really quickly a brush through there just to clean any crap out, any old grease, that kind of stuff. I'm just going to run it through there one more time. You don't want to do too much. So the brake pedal goes on like this. And don't forget, we have to put a hairpin through, so you probably won't be able to see that. It's right in behind. But I'm going to lube this up with some axle grease here. Axle grease is super water repellent, and it, ooh, there's a whole gob of it there. Eh? It lasts a long time. And what I'll do is I'm going to bend this first up. I'm going to trim these a little bit. I don't need them this long, and I don't want them to become a problem in the future. So I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to bend that one down first. And I'm actually going to use side cutters for this. And now, put just a little bit of grease back on here. We'll get that clevis in. There we go. Beautiful. And it's the same kind of process here. Put the hairpin through. This one's a little easier because you can pivot the hairpin a little like that. We're almost there. So let's just add that in. So it takes 2,300 milliliters is what the factory says that goes in here. I'm going to probably add about 2,100 to start. I'm going to put 1 liter in just to see if it leaks or not. Then I'll add it up to about 2,100 liters. I'll run it so that the system primes all the oil passages and galleries. And then I'll check the sight window again. I don't want to fill it right to the top. I like it somewhere in between the high and low. So let me get a few more of these. I'll put one more in, check for leaks, and then we'll top it up. All right, we'll try that. Let's give the bike a start. And then we'll check for final oil after that. Still needs a bit of choke here. Find the right amount. All right. There's neutral. Seems to work. Good. Seems like pretty good clutch feel. Okay, I'll have to take it out for a ride and see how it works. I'll just take it around the block. Very good. I like it. And it looks like the oil's not leaking, so that's another good thing. Okay, I'll top it up with oil, take it for a little spin. We should be good. Well, I think that went really, really well. The clutch feel is great. It's buttery smooth. The engagement's nice. I would say that when you first put it into gear, there's a little bit more of a pronounced clunk. And I've been playing with the free play a little bit to see if I can get that to stop, but I do think it's just because the clutch is brand new. The plates are really, really grabby, and there's a lot of stiction in there. I think over time that will soften. I'm still playing a little bit with the free play, the engagement, back and forth. Part of that is because of that clunking, but also just to get the right clutch feel on it. But overall, what a great improvement. Now, this is a fairly simple job. It's just turning nuts and bolts is all that it really is. But I do recommend, and I am going to recommend continually, get yourself a good manual if you're working on a bike that you're going to keep for a while. It really does help if you forget how something goes back together, or if you question a process within the reassembly or disassembly. You can really quickly go to that manual and get the information that you need. It's a really good investment for around $40 or $50. So I guess that wraps things up. I'm just going to top up a little bit of the oil just to bring it up to the right level. I think I'll give Carl a call and see if he wants to go out for a nice easy ride today, just to break the clutch discs in. And I really do appreciate everybody sticking around and seeing what I'm working on here in the Tinker Shed. So for now, I'll see you later and hope to see you soon next time on Dino's Tinker Shed.